usually HR is at the forefront.
Hey, Bill.
I'm John.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Husky gear on.
Some sort of separation or plausible deniability.
Should let me know. I could have worn my cougar gear.
Yeah, that would have been a conflict.
I'd still be a minority.
Oh, over the top.
They're gonna talk to me.
Yeah. But you didn't have right then.
Only two.
Oh, yeah. They'll still wait for dessert.
I had a chocolate on the way down.
Oh, good.
Good stuff. Thank you for reminding me.
The system was
The meeting will come to order.
creative.
Roll call.
Deputy Mayor Pelosi,
HR is a good thing.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett,
Here.
Councilmember Brown,
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey,
Here.
Councilmember Holman,
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel,
Here.
Councilmember Wales.
Here.
Are there any announcements, reports, or presentations? John.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be leaving early tonight to watch my spouse get an award at the school district. So about 6:30.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
What kind of award?
Employee of the month or,
No, it's got to be bigger than that.
well, I don't know.
List of, oh, wow.
So,
Okay, so
thank you for your consideration.
the 2A racial equity presentation, 30 minutes. Please stay with that time if you can.
Good evening, thank you. I would like to welcome back Bernardo Ruiz, who presented to council previously on our proposal for the Racial Equity and Social Justice Program at the City of Auburn. We wanted to come back and answer any follow-up questions that you may have had from the initial presentation of the program, and then talk a little bit about some of the revisions that, after discussing with Mayor Backus and with the department directors, that we've made to the plan. So hopefully we have a realistic and achievable work plan for 2019, 2020, 2021, and then extending into a fourth year of the plan, which previously we had discussed it being a 3-year plan. Just realizing that this work is going to take time. It's going to take a lot of staff time and resources of all the departments, and so kind of having that regroup of feedback from the directors with Mayor Backus to discuss a work plan that we think still moves the initiative and program forward, but in a sustainable and realistic way. So I can dive in a little bit to that, unless there's any questions right now that you want to talk about the previous presentation that Bernardo had with all of you.
Thank you for coming back. I have talked to the mayor about this, and it's something that I felt that is, I felt that it's something that we need in our city, but I had a little bit of concerns. There was two issues in there. So I'm going to wait and hear your presentation, and then ask the questions after you do your presentation. Okay, up there.
so going through the work plan, what we did was we had initially arranged the plan in a way where we were going to have a keynote to kick off educating the entire city about the Racial Equity and Social Justice Initiative. After further discussions, we decided to postpone the keynote and focus on the education and work stemming from the top down. So that would be the work at the council level as well as the director level. And then pushing the keynote into October of 2019 that we would roll out citywide. So that was one major change to the plan. We also ended up pushing some of the work plan talking about the equity team. So this would be members of the city that would volunteer by putting in an application. They would volunteer to be a part of the city's equity team. And the function of the equity team is to have ongoing discussions and a pool of people to pull from to be able to train to be the leaders and at the forefront of these discussions. In other cities, these people become the individuals that teach an orientation to all new employees, and then they have ongoing discussions and education with existing employees on this work. So we really felt when we were discussing this work that we wanted to make sure that we had a good foundation of our leadership from the top down to be able to answer any questions that staff had that would be pushing that up to our management team and to you as our council. So we wanted to start there and kind of push out some of that work into 2020 of really having our staff become the leaders and the subject matter experts in this work to give some time for us to educate and develop. And I don't know if you want to expand on any of that discussion.
Yes, thank you, Candice. So I need to recognize the leadership of Mayor Backus because she's a leader who listened to her cabinet in order to move and advance this crucial important work forward in a really powerful way. And so if you remember when I showed you the slide of the trust, and the more trust you have, the faster you can transform the organizational culture and the faster you can move the work. She just did a very astute leadership move in terms of listening and developing more trust with the leadership to be able to move the work forward in a faster way that is more powerful and impactful for the city of Auburn. We actually had a meeting with her and Candice and other leaders, and we determined that the new course of action would be the most appropriate course of action for the city of Auburn in order to really accomplish the goal of advancing racial equity and honoring, valuing, and dignifying the humanity of every resident in this beautiful city.
So that was one.
You had a point you wanted to make?
I would like to hear his presentation.
Oh, okay.
So I don't have a formal presentation today. I'm here really to answer questions in regards to the first presentation, the formal presentation that I had.
Okay, then I will. One of the concerns is what our council member Largo Wells brought up about having it be inclusive with everybody. You know, not just the different race, but we have some people who are disability, people who are our gay and lesbian groups and stuff like that. And I would really like to see that in this piece. And then also the cost. Because right now we're in a budget where we're trying to figure out where we're going to get money for our budget year 2020-24. So the cost of this program for our city and for our staff. And like I told our Mayor Nancy, that I have always felt that we need something like this in our city. But I also have to watch our budget because right now we are in a crunch for trying to figure out where we're going to get money.
So I can speak to some of the revisions that we made on the initial proposal of cost. So in the revisions that we were able to do for 2019, we took the previous cost from $150,000 down to $98,000. And then in the second year of the plan, it went, and let me just double check because I do not want to misspeak. Yeah, so 150,000 down to 98,000, and then in year 2 of the plan, we went from $199,000 down to 179,000. So our
What?
199,000 down to 179,000.
79.
So it's about a $50,000 reduction in the first year and a $20,000 reduction in the second year. That was one of the things in discussion with Mayor Backus and Bernardo, is trying to find the balance between being fiscally responsible with this work, but also not scaling back the program so much that the program isn't effective. And so I feel with these revisions that we still have a quality program, and we really leaned on Bernardo to be able to tell us where is that breaking point where we will get all of this momentum initially, and then we will sacrifice that momentum that we gained because we've cut the program down so much to try and be cognizant of cost. So really trying to evaluate that cost benefit and where would the program no longer be effective if we had cut so much. So I 100% respect what you're saying as far as that balancing, and I think that was our discussion.
You have a question?
More of a
Councilmember Holman.
statement than a question. I'm super excited about this coming to our city. But as far as the cost issue, on today's NPR News, they were talking about the difficulty major advertising groups were having in their racial equity, recognizing problems in ad campaigns that went out, from hoodie sweatshirts that mimicked blackface, and there are many other examples that they gave. I'm sure those companies would have gladly paid a guidance fee like this to have avoided those mistakes to begin with. And like most problems in racial equity, they're not overt and knowingly. They are from ignorance and unfamiliarity of another culture. What's sensitive to one is an unknown to other. And so things that promote dialogue so that we can correct the inevitable mistakes that we make. And with that said, was that a Marine Corps cap I saw you in?
Mine? No, it's from Harvard University.
Oh, sorry.
Another exclusive club.
There you go.
Yeah, I appreciate the presentation, and I'm also excited about seeing the progress that we can make. And I guess I wanted to make a comment, maybe somewhat similar to Councilmember Holman, in that, you know, I think it's so important that our city move forward with this. I know that, you know, I'm president of the Washington State Labor Council, and for the last 4 years, we have been working on race and labor very intensively and intentionally for many of the same reasons. And I would just say that, you know, of course, there is the moral aspect of this that, you know, and the fact that, you know, as Americans, we believe in all people in our communities thriving and growing and benefiting from the resources that are generated by our economy, by our community. But then there's the fiduciary responsibility we have as a city to ensure that we're well prepared to deal with the changing cultural value systems that are out there, so we don't inadvertently step in a big pothole, make a mistake say something that is offensive or wrong and find ourselves in litigation. So I think that this is the right thing, it's a smart investment, and help our city thrive.
My response, so thank you so much for your leadership. You really have a deeper analysis in terms of what this work will produce for the city of Auburn, in terms not only of the implicit moral imperative of serving every single one of the residents in this beautiful city, but also in terms of really increasing value and also decreasing liability. I was invited to present at the National Conference for Planning for the American Planning Association last week in San Francisco, and the major conversation across cities nationwide was we see this as a very intentional, meaningful, and strategic intervention to not be sued in the future, and to also be at the forefront in terms of creating the values that young people are seeking to be part of in cities now in the country. As I mentioned at the last presentation, our millennials are looking for cities where to live that reflect their own values. They're not seeking jobs now. They're seeking cities, and they are creating industries within those cities. So they are looking for jobs within those cities that reflect those values. Some of the presentations were about the economic gains that come from having a city that honors values and dignifies the humanity of every resident. And the increase in revenue is great because you're providing more opportunity for people to produce more. And in terms also of education, more people were getting bachelor's degrees, which increased the education level of the city and therefore produces more jobs. So it's a really, I would say, logical way to defend yourself in terms of liability, but also create the environment that people are seeking to when they are looking for a place to live. And if may I answer your question in terms of concerns that to be inclusive for everybody. So within the work that we are doing, or that we will be doing with Auburn, we look at different intersectionalities. And the intersectionalities of race and disability, intersectionality of race and gender, intersectionality of race and religion, or race and immigration, it's something that we're going to be focusing very deeply on, because we use race as the umbrella for which we will be tackling all the inequities that have been produced intentionally or unintentionally by city government. And so I kind of allay your worries by letting you know that even though our main focus is race, we will have a very sharp focus, laser sharp focus on the other, I would say, inequities that we have developed and diversities that we need to be able to address in order for us to create a city in which everybody thrives and is sustainable.
Mayor Backus has a comment.
Yeah, just a few things. Just as a reminder, and Bill, you brought one of these back, the Inclusive City from National League of Cities, right? It's intended to be more than just a sign at all the entrances to our city. And last year, you all did a great deal of soul searching and listening to testimony about being a sanctuary city versus a welcoming city. And I don't think that you decided to call Auburn a welcoming city just because it got press, right? I think your hearts were in the place of, we are a welcoming city. We want to be a city where everybody feels comfortable calling it their home. And so I think this just is the next obvious move in that work that you have already done and the thought that you have put into it. I do believe that there is a significant financial benefit and return on investment to this expenditure to ensure that we are getting the best and the brightest, and that we are welcoming the best and the brightest to this community, whether it be through jobs or being a resident, being a business owner. So those things are incredibly important. The adage of you have to spend money to make money kind of makes sense in this realm, because it is going to have a cost to it. But I would argue that there is a greater cost to not do this work, and I would also say that there is going to be a significant return on investment. And I will leave it with the fact that I have always thought that our budget, any budget, is a moral document.
Amen.
And having this type of work included in the budget speaks volumes about the morals and the expectations that we have for this community.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Wales.
Thank you. We've talked about tentative budget ideas for 2019 and 2020. I think this is a 3 or 4 year program. What do you have planned for 21 and for 22? That's my first question. My second question is, I understand the intersectionality of all of the different various groups, and that you're going to have this underneath the umbrella of race. So, and I assume that you're the coordinator author of this curriculum. I'd like to know what percentage of the curriculum is spent on ethnicity, gender, veterans, disability, and religion. Because I want to make sure that this is just not something that is about race. I am very, very protective because I sit next to Bill of veterans. I am very, very protective of people with disabilities. And finally, my third question is, over the 4 years, I'd be interested to know how, generally speaking, how much staff time each person is going to receive of your services. And I may be describing that wrong, so let me give you an example. Year one, it's just going to focus on city council, and there's going to be 3 10-hour presentations. Year two, we're going to hit the directors, and every director is going to get 16 hours. Year three, something like that. So I can see how much time we're going to lose in relationship to employees and their other functions, and what we may need to do to cover those. Those are my 3 questions.
So you're kind of looking for a statement of work?
But not on a Gantt chart.
No. But is that right? You're looking for a statement of work in these 3 years?
Yeah.
I would be happy to answer the first question on 2021 and the estimated budget for that year. So the investment for 2021 would be $130,000. The reason why I didn't focus on 2021 and 2022 was I think in our discussions with Mayor Backus and Bernardo and myself, we realized that this is a working document and a plan, and that we want to have multiple check-in points where we're assessing how well the implementation of this plan is going, and if we need to course correct or slow down, or we can speed up, or those types of things. So I guess in 2021, our focus is going to be a lot of work with our community and reinforcement of the first 2 years of the plan. And then in 2022, the costs at this point are unknown, because the goal of the end of the program would be to have a FTE dedicated to this work in the city of Auburn, so that we can transition out of a consulting relationship and more into having our own internal subject matter expert to continue this work on. And obviously that would need to be a discussion during a budget process, as other staff will be asking for positions as well. So that's why we don't have a estimated cost for the 4th year.
I guess that the reason why I wanted to know about the costs, and you're alluding to the concept of having an on-site expert, we're looking at $500,000. And I know that my background is public education, And what many of the major school districts have done is brought in at the start an FTE that is, that does this kind of training. And have we looked at having an FTE come expert, hiring somebody to be on staff, that model, or what other models have we looked at in relationship to this kind of service?
So I think initially our thought was that we looked at neighboring cities and those that were dedicating positions to this work, and those have been larger cities. Looking at Renton, they had implemented a consultant that has been an ongoing person that has been helping develop their program from the ground up. So for us, we thought that it was the most efficient use of the funds to be able to have the subject matter expert come in on a consulting basis, because this cost for, at least for the first year, and of $98,000, that covers training as well as other keynotes and consultants. So it's multiple subject matter experts. If we were to hire an FTE with salary and benefits, it would probably be well over that. And then that position would still have to bring in the subject matter experts to do the keynotes. So our thought process was, if we spend the money on the experts first to educate and train and develop the program from the ground up, then on that fourth year we can transition work that's already been done to somebody who can take that and then run with it. So that was the philosophy that we looked at, just based on what other agencies were doing in our position.
We've got two other
Claude.
questions to answer. He's going to talk to us about the percentages of the curriculum under the umbrella of race, and he's going to give us an idea of how much staff time.
Are you gonna do that today, tonight?
I can answer, I can give you a high-level response right now. So part of the curriculum, and actually it was developed by me and myself and Dr. Nikompan, and also some other national leaders that have looked at this work very intentionally. And it's based on national best practices from the Government Alliance of Racial Equity, which is the leading organization that provides support for this work in terms of leadership development and curriculum. We spend considerable amount of time in analyzing very deeply the history of the United States and the creation of different inequities. And we develop a shared analysis which goes deeper than just going into the different diversities or the intersectionalities and analyzing them. We are training people to look for those in a way that enhances the content of their work. So what we want to do is to make sure that we have leaders in government jobs that have that racial lens and the intersectionality lens to recognize the inequities that are taking place, whether they are on gender or on veteran status. And my respects, my stepdaddy is a veteran from the Vietnam War, and that's really close to my heart, because they have defended the right for us to do this work right now. And so we very intentionally work on identifying where those inequities happen within the organization and create plans to address them. We look at different leadership frameworks from Harvard University, the practice of adaptive leadership, immunity to change, and we look at ways in which we can impact the system in a way that the shared focus and analysis becomes part of the DNA of the organization. And in terms of time, I don't see that we're taking people away from their work. I see that people are enhancing their profession by having and acquiring the skills and knowledge required to have that lens so they can do their job in a way that does not intentionally or unintentionally negatively impact the residents of the city of Auburn. And what we're asking for the first year is a 6-day training, which is 8 hours for each training, so 48 hours on the first year, to build the capacity of the mayor's cabinet and also directors to begin identifying what are some of the key ways that they can really set metrics and outcomes to decrease inequities within the city of Auburn. And the goal of that, when Candice mentioned the racial equity team, is that we build internal capacity for the organization to provide training and advice and also lead the work in a powerful way that builds relationships, decreases silos, and permeates the whole organization. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I really respect and the conceptual framework. I'd appreciate more information for the following years, like the 48 hours. Okay, that's really great. And I'd also like to know, I'd like to see your curriculum so I can see what percentage goes to gender and what percentage goes to, not that I know what's sacred about different percentages, but I want to make sure that it's just not on race, that it's on some of the other issues that we're nationally facing. Thank you.
And we will be providing that to
Great.
the mayor and candidates.
Thank you.
Okay, Council Member DeCoursey.
Councilmember Wills, I had the exact same question she had on the cost over the 4 years, so thank you for that, for clarifying that. I'm also looking at all-inclusive this as well, including one that hasn't been mentioned yet, that's age. So I think we need to look at all this together. Well, we have some elders on the council here, so I think it's important to include all that. And also, as Councilmember Wells mentioned, she's talking curriculum. Is there an actual type of a syllabus we could look at and how this format comes out?
I will provide that to the mayor and Candice by next Monday.
I think it's important for us as a council to understand the progression from day one as we go through the time period that's planned for this and how that's going to fold out. And as you mentioned, there is an investment in time. So when employees are doing this 48 hours, they're not doing other things, which is okay. But it is still an investment in employees' time as they take time away from their normal duties when they train. Like all of us would have to train in our jobs and take time away from our regular duties with that. The question I have also is that in looking at the rollout for the 4 years, is this a locked-in contract for 4 years? Do we have some opportunities to look at reducing costs further? Or how is the structure of the contract going to be made so we know as a council all along the 4 years the cost factors, and then also looking at periodic reports back to the council maybe on a quarterly basis?
So it was our intent to put in the contract an amount not to exceed. As we review how we're progressing on the plan, then that could change. But obviously, if it's underneath the amount not to exceed, then that would be our intent, is to ask for that ceiling. And then if we can't accomplish all of the plan in that plan year, then we would have to do a refocus and move things down. But I think after we've done the analysis and getting the feedback that we had and going through and really digging into the detail of the proposal, I think we have a more manageable and reasonable workload that we can absorb into our regular duties, and that the city can absorb that's reasonable but still moving the plan forward in an intentional way. And so I think it would be our intent to try and stick to that plan as much as we could.
And in terms of the syllabus and the curriculum, it is based on national best practice. And we'll have all the references when I provide it to the mayor so she can share it with you. But it's progressive and iterative with the goal of creating a shared analysis throughout the organization.
So now as you're going through this, and you see, I guess, say some of the dynamics unfolding within the city organization, is there something that can also be tailor-made to meet
Yes.
the needs of the city rather than a canned program?
Yes, and part actually of one of the years is developing the curriculum for every single staff member. And that is tailored to meet the needs of the city of Auburn. And when I said that we're taking time to turn in the syllabus and the curriculum, it is because we are actually tailoring it to the city of Auburn. We have curriculum we developed for Snohomish and Marysville and Edmonds and other cities we have worked with and school districts. But in order for us to really be meaningful, intentional, and strategic, we need to look at the city in the context of the residents and the staff and the culture in order for us to develop what we believe is the right curriculum for that. And when we get to the point of training all the staff, it's actually a process of co-creating. We don't have a canned model that is a cookie cutter that we just produce and go to other organizations or cities and say, you need to do this. We really look at what is needed in order for the organization to advance racial equity. And then we develop the curriculum to meet the specific needs. And that's what we're planning to do with Auburn.
I see the contract or agreement including a statement of work, you know, not a big page like this, but brief, deliverables, product deliverables, reports, so the council understands what's going on, and then a timeline, an estimated timeline. So that's what I see in the agreement, which many of the council have already stated, but I wanted to throw in my 2 cents. Bob.
This question's for Candace, I believe. I hope I didn't misunderstand what you were saying earlier, but were you proposing to have this subject matter expert FTE this year?
No, so that would be in 2022. It would be in the 4th year of the plan.
Because I thought I misunderstood you about bringing the person on board early so that they could be part of the development of the process.
Yeah, my intent was to just respond to the question on if we had looked at that model of bringing on an FTE in the first year. And it was our recommendation to Mayor Backus, based on the research, that we were going to work with a consultant first to help build the program before we turned it over then to a staff member. Just because if we would have hired a staff member in addition to the consultant advising, getting that up off the ground and doing these keynotes and things that we'll be doing to kick this off, the investment would be extremely high. So.
Yeah, I think I kind of concur with a lot of my colleagues here that we're trying to put value to what we're really going to be getting out of this entire program. I, for one, and I think I speak for our mayor as well, and probably Deputy Mayor Pelosa, that having worked at Boeing, we were totally immersed in a lot of this racial equity and other equity programs that they had. They certainly didn't cover a lot of the other ones that have been brought up this evening, but certainly it was supposed to be an eye-opener for all the employees to be more cognizant, more aware of the other individuals that are out there and all of their particular situations and conditions, and to be very mindful and considerate of those things, because we were all pretty much in a situation where we were hiring people and things of that nature. So I feel personally that I have been somewhat immersed into that process already after 45 years at Boeing. But the whole point is here is I need to kind of get my arms around this whole thing from the value added, because we are a very diverse community here in Auburn. And I think that most of our staff, speaking from my own observations over the years, that they are very, very cognizant and very considerate of the diversity that we have in our city. So I'm trying to get my arms around this elephant about value for what we're really going to be getting out of this program.
That's a great question. Actually, Bernardo and I talked about that this morning, and you, like most of our directors are feeling as though our employees here already have a level of understanding and acceptance of differences in backgrounds and cultures, and that we're ready to go and have that work product, the deliverable at the end. So I talked with Bernardo about what that looks like. As you hear agencies present to you in study sessions, you hear about them refer to their racial equity and social justice tools that they have implemented in their organizations. And some of the directors had asked, how do we expedite having all of our programs go through that lens, and so we can have those deliverables at the end. And I was excited to hear that, because it means that all of the directors want to move on this program, and that that heavy lift and that big move has already been done because of the great staff that we have in the city. And so I discussed that with Bernardo, and he can explain a little bit further, but he talked about having essentially that shared understanding and a shared language that I think all of us have great intent and our hearts and minds are in the right place, but I think we all have additional education to do and have that kind of baseline shared analysis that Bernardo's been talking about. So I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Candy. So this is really exciting because people like you and the cabinet and staff members have expressed that they really understand that we need to honor and value the diversity in the city of Auburn, because that's one of the greatest strengths. And having said that, there have been inequities built within government, policies, practices, laws, and procedures that have inadvertently created disparate results in terms of negatively impacting people of color without people being overly prejudiced or wanting to create harm. But you don't know what you don't know if you haven't really created a deeper understanding and a shared analysis on how to recognize certain things within city government that either advance racial equity or advance the status quo, which is institutionalized racism. And if we look at the history of the United States and the Constitution and all the laws that were created, they were created to the detriment of people of color, to the benefit of land-owning people and the elite. And so in order for us to have that analysis and to recognize that within our departments and within the context of our work, we can either advance equity or perpetuate inequities, is something that we need to develop for everybody to speak the same language, be on the same page, and have a shared understanding throughout the city about what creating the environment for everybody to thrive and a city that is sustainable takes.
All right. Well, I had the pleasure, I guess, or displeasure, as you may consider it, of attending an entire day up at to Green River College about racial equity. And some of the testimonials that I heard at some of those workshops and seminars that were given were a little heartbreaking to some regard. However, I didn't see those kind of things happening in our city. So this is part of my dilemma here, where I'm trying to understand there may be a need, but I'm trying to get my arms around that need.
Larry, you've got Troutman
You know,
and Wales.
being
And
the
then
only
you-
Latina on the council, sometimes I've said I wish they could walk in my shoes, to understand what we go through. And there has been times, this is my second term, there were times that I felt like I wasn't part of this council. And also not only on the council, when I belonged to the planning commission, I even had a person tell me that I shouldn't have been on that council. And look at our staff, look at our council, it's all white. And these are some of the stuff. We are a very diverse community. We do have a lot of different cultures in this city, but yet people don't really understand unless they walk in our shoes on what we are trying to say. That's why I told Mayor Nancy that at the first when I heard you were going to do this, I thought the city definitely needs it, you know? And I remember when I was out there in the workforce, my boss would say, "Oh, I finally met my quota." And this was like, wow, I'm a quota. It's something that I have gone to. I spoke to the mayor about this, that I've gone to 2 of these types of workshops with the Auburn High School, with the administrators and the teachers and the aides and stuff. And it was a real eye-opener to both sides. And then when I was there when Councilmember Baggett was at the community college. And I really, that training there really brought it closer to where I was talking about for many years. I'm glad that you are here and you brought this topic to our city, because I definitely really think our city needs it. But as Mr. DeCourcy also said, if there's times that we can reduce the cost, because I have to listen to our constituents when they're talking about where are we spending our money, you know? And this is something that we as adults should already know, you know, that you treat each other with respect and dignity and everything, but it's your upbringing that has a lot to do with it as well. But anyways, thank you for bringing it here, and I hope that we all decide to do it, thank you.
Might just say something about the investment on the training. So Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Harvard Business Schools states that for every unit of accountability that we require from people to do, we must provide a unit of support. And if we don't provide a unit of support, then we cannot really hold people accountable for the results we want to see in the elimination of inequities throughout the city of Auburn. So this is really exciting work. I know and I understand your points, and they are very punctual and important. But I'm here to really tell you that it goes beyond just our moral imperative of that we must do this work. It goes to the 3 E's of cities nationwide that everybody's focusing on, which is economics, environment, and equity. And if we don't focus on that third leg for the stool, then we're not going to be supporting ourselves in a strong foundation, because that equity component of holding shared analysis and shared definition of what it means to be equitable within city government is missing. So yeah, this is exciting, and at the same time, it is what city needs to do in order to thrive, because otherwise they are going to fall behind.
Margot Wells,
Thank you.
council member.
Thank you. You keep alluding to shared intentionality, and as an educator, that's what we try to do in the classroom. And the power of that is, you know, many times understated. So I'm really excited to hear you talk about the concept of shared intentionality. Taking that a little bit further, because I'm an old school administrator, we need to look at our structure, and we need to look at our board policies and all of those. Where in this plan do you see that we start looking at some of the structural aspects besides just the moral and that?
Yeah, I think what really distinguishes our work in terms of leadership development from other consulting groups that provide leadership development in terms of racial equity is that we look at the structures and the institutions that have developed either advertently or inadvertently those inequities within the system. So I was also school administrator, and I served 4 superintendents in Seattle Public Schools, and we were able to look at the policies, practice, and procedures with a very intentional shared analysis and lens to identify which policies were contributing to disparate impacts within the student population.
Year 1, 2, 3, 4, when?
Oh, we're going to start year 1.
Year 1.
Thank you.
Year 1, yes.
Thank you.
Oh, right away. And actually part of the conversation that Candice and I had in the morning was that in the syllabus you will see that 1 or 2 days of the training is specifically focused on how to identify those policies, practices, and procedures through a shared analysis.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Brown.
Well, actually, I'll truncate what I had to say because Councilmember Trout Manuel really said it. And that is, for some of us that are in privileged positions, that is being male and white and over 21, we might not see a problem. But if you were in someone else's skin, I would suggest that that may not be, the intention might not be as important as the effect or the impact. That's all I would say. Thank you.
We have gone way over our time, and unless there are any other questions from council, we should move on because we have a full agenda. So, but I do want to thank you all. Every meeting that we have, it branches out into new ideas, new comments, so it's all positive.
Yes, and I appreciate the opportunity to be before you to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. All right. We're going to go to 3A, RPG Properties. Introduction of inland construction by Mr. Tate. And you have other colleagues too.
Yes, that is
Hey.
true. Can I have some assistance logging back in? Thank you. Good evening. For the record, my name is Jeff Tate. I'm Director of Community Development. And tonight I'd like to introduce to my left here, to your right, John Fisher and Scott Morris, who are representatives of Inland Construction. And included in your packet tonight is a slideshow that John and Scott are going to walk council through. But I thought before turning it over to them, I could just add a little bit of context to why we're here tonight and why we have asked a developer to come and talk to City Council. Not something that we've done in the past very frequently. Part of the reason is that Inland is interested in acquiring the RPG property. The RPG property, also known as the Valley 6 Drive-In. And it's that 70-acre site at the very north end of town. And I don't need to impart upon council how eager the city of Auburn has been to see the redevelopment of that site come to fruition. And it's been a lot of years in the making, working with RPG to develop a sub-area plan and to develop a structure around which to redevelop that property. RPG has made that property for sale. And if you'll recall, RPG is a California-based company. Most of their holdings are in California and Hawaii. And this is the only holding that they have in Washington State. So it's not always on their top priority list of properties to consider development of. Typically, a development proposal would come in through a normal application process. This site's unique. There's a development agreement in effect on this property. And development agreements, you're gonna hear that term a lot. Development agreement was previously approved by City Council in 2011. And consider it a negotiated agreement between a city and a private property owner to do something that's a little bit more out of the box than what the typical zoning rules allow or require. So a development agreement, typically the interest of entering into one of those agreements is that The developer has more flexibility to do something on the property, and the city gets more than what the code typically asks. It's a really simplified way of breaking down why you would have a development agreement. It's a tool that's set forth in state law, and it's used in lots of municipalities. What we wanted to do tonight was make sure that Inland had an opportunity to introduce themselves to council, because as they consider acquisition of that property and as they consider different ideas for how they might develop the property, ultimately some of those ideas might and probably would require an amendment to the development agreement, which means they're back in front of you later on. So right now, tonight, is an introduction. As I've set forth in the agenda, Bill, there's some questions that council may want to consider. There's probably not a lot of answers for everything because it's sort of in an earlier stage of conversation. Myself and some of the other city staff have had the opportunity to sit down with Scott and John a number of times for 2 and 3 hour sessions to try to work through the complexity of how development of this site might actually manifest itself. So a lot of that conversation's been about process. There's a lot of pieces that govern this property. Besides the development agreement, you have a unique zoning code, the C4 designation. You have an environmental impact statement that was previously done to evaluate the impacts of what RPG had anticipated. You have a sub-area plan. There's lots of parts to this piece of property, and that creates complexity, not just because there's a bunch of different documents, but to modify them and to implement them, there's a different process for each of those. Some of that's legislative, where it comes before city council, or some of it is, which is the development agreement. Some of it might be code change, which has to go to planning commission, then city council. Some of it is administrative, where staff is looking at the environmental impact statement. There's a lot of parts to this. So before going too far down this path, again, thought it would be a great idea to have Inland come and talk to city council, explain a vision, and hear if there are questions. I should say that if there are questions, I think that there might be opportunity to answer some of those tonight, but there might be an opportunity to just have to follow up with council on other types of questions, depending upon the nature of that. We only have about 20 minutes, so I want to make sure that Inland has their time to get through the slide deck. So I'm hoping that you can hold questions to the end.
Well, till the end?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine if that's the way you want to orchestrate it, sure.
I do want to say that we're still in this brainstorming session. Details have not been sorted out for the types of common development questions, like will it look like this, will it have that, and it's still in the brainstorming session, and it's been a productive and I believe relatively collaborative conversation between both Inland and the city to just try to work through issues and develop some concepts and things of that nature. So I think I'll at this point just turn it over to John and Scott, and slides I can do it for you. I think I'll peel away for a moment while I'm thinking of the floor, and I'll come up if there are questions.
So I'm Scott Morris, and thanks for having me tonight. I want to start just thanking Jeff Tate and also Jeff Dixon, who's here, and Steve Gross. We've been meeting with them pretty much weekly for several months now. They're obviously super knowledgeable, but they're also really good guys, and we've enjoyed our time together, and we've come a long way in the last few months on this project that John's going to speak about. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the Inland Group. We're a developer, contractor, and owner of multifamily housing, and we have 46 operating communities right now, a little over 8,200 units, over half of which are in the state of Washington, and over half of those are in the I-5 corridor. So this is, while maybe not physically home to us, it's basically our development home. And we are super excited about this site for reasons that John will get into. We're going to be really quick, mindful of your time. and trying to leave as much as we can for a question and answer and some interaction as we go through. But as Jeff mentioned, obviously, in order to proceed, we need to amend the development agreement that the city has entered into with RPG. It's interesting, the purpose of this development agreement was to expedite development of 70 acres. And the irony is as we sit here today, the biggest obstacle or the impediment to development is in fact this development agreement. It's massive. It contemplates a 70-acre development with over $2 million of off-site and infrastructure improvements, 1.6 million square feet of office space, 720,000 square feet of retail commercial, and 500 multifamily units in a vertical construction, so not on the ground floor. And I can't speak to what's happened over the last 12 years and what was going on at the time, but I would propose to you that it's quite possible that you were overpromised back in the day. And what you've seen is through one of the most robust economies that we've seen in recent times, nothing's happened. And the property is sat vacant. And now RPG wants out, which makes it more difficult. Because now to find someone come do the development, they have to purchase 70 acres of land, excess of $15 million. They have to do $2 million of infrastructure work just to start the construction work, which could be $100 million of construction work. And then hope that there's a commercial environment out there for it to go get the returns. And you have to do that in an economy that's kind of moved towards e-commerce. There's been over 13,000 closings in the last 2 years, and you've seen companies like Sears, JCPenney's, Kmart, all leave the market. Companies like The Gap and Payless and Gymboree and others cut back. And I would argue to you that this development agreement's no longer realistic, if it ever was. And so it's now standing in the way of getting a Trader Joe's or a restaurant or a fitness center or a medical clinic to come into the community, things that are needed that I think there'd be a demand for if they could come in and develop today. But they're not going to come in and purchase 70 acres and do $2 million of infrastructure improvements so they can put in a restaurant. Well, we've come up with a plan that's been refined a lot over the last couple of months in working with the Jeffs. And we are super excited about it, and we're here to talk to you about it. And John, who's the lead developer, will kind of share what our vision is.
Yeah. So we started small in the sense of when we entered the picture with RPG, they had listed on the market, and we were looking for a multifamily site. Had gotten under contract with them, and they were in the process of securing a buyer for the north portion, which would be the commercial portion. That buyer ended up being a group that there sounded like little appetite within the city to move forward with and amend a development agreement to allow the type of use they were proposing, which was warehousing and some light industrial use. We were not excited initially to be partnering with that use to the north of us. I felt like it was really holding us back on kind of the work we wanted to do and the type of development. So we maneuvered to be able to take over the purchase of the entire property, which we felt was not only in our best interest, but the city's as well, in the sense of working with one developer to negotiate and go through the amendment process instead of two competing pieces that may be in conflict at times. So what may have been, and who knows what the past is, but a project with the current owner who might have been low on their list of priorities to develop, it's now become our kind of marquee development project within our organization, something that has grown from a small piece to a very large piece, and along the way we've been excited to jump at the opportunity to take it over and create a plan that we think can be executed on, is realistic, and really provides a certainty of development for the entire master plan, residential and commercial, which I'll run through here. I think that's probably the biggest strength that Inland brings is not only our track record, but we're local, we're Washington-based. Like I said, this is a top priority for us, in making this a realization. So the vision really is a couple items. We're really focusing on amenity-rich living options, which it's tailored around a healthy living environment, providing access to trails, outdoor open space, connecting that commercial component, which we're calling the marketplace, with the residences through the center of the development, which we're referring to as the heart. And that's really where kind of the transect of all the trail systems and pedestrian amenities come together and really connect the project into a cohesive master plan. Through this all, what it's doing is the residential component, which is our expertise. We're also a general contractor and build product for everyone under the sun, from resort communities to commercial to infrastructure. So you name it, we built it. We have the skill set to execute the plan that we have before you today. But what it's doing is the residential component is really providing the opportunity to build the off-site infrastructure that the city is looking for, the extension of 49 I Street, and so forth, that the grid pattern on the north side has been lacking, and that we'll be providing through this development, as well as providing what Scott was mentioning, a development-ready pad for tenants to come in and actually plug in and put a use in. So, you know, attracting smaller scale businesses and developers who can come in and take that infrastructure and do something pretty quickly with it. Essentially, a building permit is what we're looking for at the end of the day, where we would do the heavy lifting and be able to get commercial tenants in quickly into the site. So the overall concept, like I alluded to, is really about connection. One, creating a draw on the north side for community and neighborhood amenity space, and connecting that to all the existing trail systems that you guys enjoy in your community, and extending those through the project to really create a destination place for North Auburn and the surrounding community. The vision that we have is really a local neighborhood-based retail and office configuration, which is going to be built around a main amenity draw, so the central public amenity space that I'll go over in more detail here. The residential component as well is really about the connection between the existing open space and providing outdoor and indoor recreation activities for our residents and just the community at large, in the sense of the proposed trail systems, playgrounds, sport courts, and so forth that we're planning throughout the development here. The marketplace, what we're referring to the retail commercial component, what we're proposing again is that creation of certainty of development. So this land has been sitting vacant for so long, trying to attract various anchor tenants and so forth. And what we're proposing again is to create that certainty of development through the heavy lift of that infrastructure improvements, road improvements that are required to make that a success. The residences is something that we've been honing in over years of developing multifamily communities. We've really put together what we think is a great program of comfortable apartment communities. We're proposing up to 4-bedroom units, which is not something you see regularly in a apartment community, but there is such a lack of supply for larger units for larger families in the marketplace. It's something that we started doing more of a few years ago, and it was amazing the reaction we were getting from families in the community just desperate for that extra bedroom for home office or family. We've been doing our development through the Evergreen Sustainable Design Standards, and it's not only about efficiency, energy efficiency, but it's about a healthy home. So interior, low, no VOC, formaldehyde-free products is really a key part of the product that we put together. And really focusing on indoor amenity space through gymnasium space within our clubhouses, business centers and so forth, is coupled with our outdoor amenity space, which we're proposing pools, splash pads, and so forth for our residents. Say the most exciting thing that we've been spending time with staff on has been what can we give the city? What can we provide that creates an amenity space and a draw and something that you all can be proud of and the residents can be proud of for North Auburn and the Auburn Gateway area. And in looking at a lot of aerial photos initially, you see this drive-in movie theater. And I grew up next to a drive-in movie theater, and it was always a fun experience. And so we had this idea of kind of capturing that nostalgia of that past and kind of pedestrianizing it for the future in the sense of a summer outdoor theater event space. So we're thinking, grassy amphitheater and a stage, and we can set up a summer movie event space and have a series out there. So I kind of got the ball rolling of, well, yeah, that sounds cool and that could be fun, and we can kind of hark back to the original use of this site. And from that, it's really grown into an outdoor venue designed for people, not cars, that could really become a flexible space for the arts, for festivals, ideas of marketplace or a food truck event coupled with the summer theater program. And from there, that's where it really started getting excited for us, is not only are we providing something for the city, but our residents and the commercial tenants too is really a draw. Why should someone go here? What is available there? And it's really about that community equity that we're putting into this development. And we think that's going to be a strength not only for our residents that will be living there and commercial tenants, but for the surrounding neighborhood to be able to come and gather and participate and take advantage of those amenities there for the entire community. So that is a really quick nutshell of 3 to 4 months worth of hours working with staff. Does not do it justice. But really what we're here today to do is to take the temperature of council, to really get your input and feedback and questions, concerns. Would love to follow up individually or with groups as well to continue to answer questions. Scott's going to talk a little bit about timing and kind of what we're up against as a developer with our financing package that kind of puts that pressure on understanding where everyone's feeling today.
So here's the catch. There's always a catch, right? We have to close and be in the ground with construction by the end of the year. So good or bad, it's moving quickly. We have an allocation from the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, bonds for this, that will go away at the end of the year, so we have to realize on it before the end of the year. We're motivated to do so, but as a result, we've already had to start dual tracking this, where in a perfect world, we'd be coming in, we'd be talking with you, we'd be working for months and months on a development agreement amendment, and then we'd start the work. We don't have that luxury now. So we are dual tracking it right now, and we're spending thousands of dollars a month, and we're proceeding with some design, things that can still be changed, but going in there. So what we're asking is, if you don't share our enthusiasm, if you're not excited, to let us know. Because there's plenty of opportunities out there, there's plenty of work, and we have no interest in wasting your time or our dollars. And we'd have an obligation to get that allocation back to the Washington State Housing Finance Commission so it can be used. So we're looking just for honesty and a signal to us of you want us to continue, or a signal to staff that says work with these guys, let's make this happen, or honesty of this really isn't going to work, we're going to wait around for this to happen, which we'd understand too, but we're motivated to go. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Wales has a question.
Well, I'm very excited, and I'm really excited about the idea of 4 bedrooms, because a lot of our families have the need for additional space because of our multiple races and ethnicity. Well, you know what I mean. We have extended families, and we need to have. And then some of us don't have extended family, but we got kids that'll never leave. And so this is very, very exciting. So I'm excited. But what I wondered is, as you do this planning and move forward, because I'm so terribly excited, it would be nice if we had an area for pets to run free. It would be nice to have a north end area, you know, for pets. And finally, this would have a significant impact with 500 units on the north end as it relates to schools. So we need to start bringing the schools on board, because the north end school is Dick Scobie and it's pretty full. So it may be one that they're, do you know, Mayor Backus, is that one that they're replacing or?
Yes, it is.
Oh, great. So I know it's gonna have additional space, but there would be an impact. So pets, pet run, yes.
Councilmember Trout Manuel, and then Councilmember DeCoursey.
And she said basically what I wanted to say too about the extra bedroom, because we're in such need of homes right now with families. And that extra bedroom would really come in handy instead of having somebody sleeping in a closet, you know. But this is awesome. This is so exciting. Can you start tomorrow?
I'd love to.
We started in January, so.
This is just, you know, you say here having another farmer's market. That would be an awesome place to have one too. Instead of them going to Kent, they could stay here in Auburn and do their shopping here in Auburn. A water park as well. People from over there don't come into, you know, some do come, but that would be a nice place for them to have it. You have everything that we need. You basically, and Largo, the open space here could be your doggy run, you know?
Trader Joe's.
This is really,
That would be
really nice. Thank you. Thank you for coming to Auburn and wanting to work with us, because I'm sure if we could vote now, we'd probably all vote yes.
And we do have to give some credit to Jeff Dixon and Jeff
Yeah,
Tate, and
he's
who've
awesome.
been leading us. And like I said, this wasn't like we came in with this plan. This is something that's evolved over the last several months.
I have to say, Jeff is awesome.
Which
We're
one?
so lucky.
Both.
That one, both, yeah. We're so lucky to have Jeff in our staff. But anyways, a wonderful job, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember
Thank you.
DeCoursey.
No, I was really impressed with your conceptuals. Well thought out. I like the layout. I like the concept. And we have a number of questions that were posed, potential council questions related to this. I think it's very well thought out. I really embrace the outdoor theater concept.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that's like really not only needs that, but a lot of us grew up in the
Yeah.
drive-in theater era. To bring this back, I know we do a little bit here in town regarding that, but that's going to be such a draw. It's just really impressive overall. A couple questions also. One that we had related to the council questions about the vertical construction of residential, about potentially going up higher rather than more horizontal with it to increase have the same number of units and less space. And then also with the FEMA impact in 2020 and how you have that marked out on your plan here, how does that impact the development with that 2020 FEMA decision of floodplain?
Yeah. So I'll start on your first question and try to keep it brief, and we'd love to follow up with more, provide written responses as well, if that's helpful. So the vertical component versus horizontal component, there's two factors that weigh in on that. One is market conditions for, you know, what sort of leases you could charge for that commercial component that would offset the loss of rent typically in a ground floor unit. And then two, which is the biggest cost driver or the biggest decision maker, is the cost of that construction type. So moving from, you know, 4-story at grade to a podium configuration of 4/1 or 5/1, you're typically, what we're seeing in our construction activities up and down the I-5 corridor, that's easily a 40 to 50% add in cost. Where in some markets like downtown Seattle, where we've done a few projects, you can do that and recoup, you know, based on rents and the commercial space. It's not something we're seeing the ability to do here in Auburn, and would definitely figure that out, because that would have been a lot easier as far as amending the development agreement by just doing it in a vertical configuration, but could not make that pencil. The economics were not working with that. And so that's why we want to move to a horizontal configuration. The same intent is there, but clearly laid out in a little bit different way. With the idea of along Auburn Way and 277th, the visible portions being your commercial activities with residences kind of tucked back in. So that's definitely would be the draw for residents and neighbors up there. You had the FEMA floodplain.
Yeah, I'll just bring up
Yeah.
a couple of maps that would help visualize some of this. So this is the aerial photograph, and just you kind of have to visualize what the site looked like on the map that they provided. But essentially, you're talking about that area, and then this southern half too. Sorry.
Yeah, kind of this.
So, and then that area. So so that's just the general aerial photograph. The current FEMA map looks like this. So all the blue that covers there is FEMA floodplain. So of the 70 acre site, approximately 35 acres are in the floodplain right now. When those maps go into effect, which should be spring of next year, it'll change to add the green areas too. So about 15 more acres gets included. So outside the FEMA floodplain, they'll be left with about a 20-acre footprint. Two things that I would mention. One is that to add further urgency, FEMA doesn't vest development the same way that the city or the state does. So for us, under state law, simplified statement is that when you submit a complete development permit application, if we determine it to be complete, you vest to the codes that are in effect on that day. FEMA, you actually have to have foundations in the ground. That means you've got to have the development permits submitted, reviewed, approved, grading and utility and infrastructure work done, and then foundations in the ground. That's, we all will struggle with that, because as FEMA map changes, that becomes very challenging for the landowner, it becomes very challenging for the city as well. But one thing that Inland has also said that they're interested in doing is moving through a map amendment process with FEMA to try to adjust these lines as well. And they have every financial interest to accomplish that, because they have, as they've indicated on their site plan, they're showing potential buildings in those locations. And to prep a site and for the amount of work that goes into, the investment that goes into the site, there's every interest to try to pursue that. And that's no easy task, but it's a possibility to move through that.
Larry, did you have a question?
Yeah, so with respect to the makeup of the 500 residential units, what percentage is rental and what percentage would be potential for condominium or purchase?
Yeah, that was an early discussion that we had. The financing we've secured is for a rental structure. So the first 500 units or that phase would be all rental. We had a discussion with the mayor about that and the current condo laws. We built a lot of condos back in the day. We're sued on every single one. So it's something we've pulled back from, the whole industry has, unfortunately, because it's a great first step into home ownership and building wealth and equity. But until those laws change, you're not going to see many developers jump in and do that. We definitely took note of that and have talked internally about future phases on the north or other areas that could make sense in, but currently not envisioned for the first phase.
Yeah. And we look at this as, this is a little bit of a reverse of what you're doing. We're using the residential to go spur the commercial. And to also support all the massive infrastructure, the land purchase, things of that nature. We're certainly going to need the commercial to go make it up because we're doing improvements well off the site, making commercial-ready development pads. And we're motivated to go do it to help support the heart and the community foundation of it. But the plan is to go do the multifamily that will help spur the rest.
Councilmember Wales.
John, I need this explained to me in Jeff Tate English. So we're not going to do as much vertical where we have the homes on top of the commercial, and we're going to do more horizontal, because your experience has been, except for in Seattle, that it's hard to fill the commercial that's with renters and businesses. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, the simple answer is the financing to develop commercial space is much different than a multifamily loan or a product like that. And so for that you need anchor tenants, long-term lease signed early, and that's the part where we're talking we're using the residential to spur the commercial in the sense of providing pad-ready sites for new users to come in. Because right now we're going to start the marketing and the pursuit of those tenants and the sale of that property and or long-term tenants, but unless you're in a pretty dense area already, typically that style of construction and configuration is pretty hard to make pencil.
We've seen that. We've seen that with the reserve and the villa. We've seen that over here a little bit with the Trek, and we're seeing that I think in Kent a little bit, where some of the anchors have gone away and there's not much interest. So I wanted to make sure I understood the concepts.
Yeah. And our concept too is your downtown is redeveloping beautifully in the sense of the product that's coming in here and that vertical mixed use stuff. We also want to distinguish ourselves a little bit in the sense of focusing on that kind of healthy lifestyle outdoor amenity space and event center.
And Pet Place.
Pet Place, absolutely.
Wonderful.
To help kind of, between downtown and what we hope will be a fully built out, beautiful destination spot.
Creative personality, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Troutman.
How many commercials sites are you building in the heart?
Oh, in this area?
Yeah.
The concept for the center would be that it's event space or outdoor recreation space. So there'd be, an amphitheater or a stage where you could set up screen or have concerts. There'd be, idea we had is you put in the infrastructure for a food truck venue. So there's power there. There's, utility sewer. They can come in, plug in. You can do an event there. So more flexible outdoor space. Of course, there'd be bathrooms and other structures like that.
Businesses in there?
No, what we're hoping is that, the businesses, commercial would be right up against that. Patios, restaurants, bars that would spill out onto that space and be more of a dynamic space like that.
Bob.
Quick question. Does your plan consider extending I Street out to 277?
It does. So there is a menu of mitigation items that were originally contemplated with the EIS that envisioned the type of intensity originally proposed, which includes 49th extension from D Street through, we're looking at a roundabout at 49th and I, and then I Street connecting here. These are the ongoing conversations we're having with Ingrid recently and her staff, where we're starting to engage Public Works on what this infrastructure needs are for our development, what the city needs and wants in terms of off-site improvements. So our intent is to stick to the original plans if our uses trigger those improvements. our use is gonna be smaller than originally contemplated, so there are some items that may not make sense anymore, or there might not be a need for. But in general, yes, we're looking at spending several $1 million of providing that off-site and frontage improvements needed for the city and our communities.
Two of your council members here live at the north end there, and that would be a very interest for us. And I know that Ingrid's been hammered with questions over the years about
When is it
that.
gonna be built?
It was made clear to us right at the beginning that I Street was very important.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
One last question. Will the multifamily housing product be market rate housing?
No,
No.
it'll be workforce housing. That's why we're going through the Washington State Housing Finance Commission with the bond allocation.
Okay.
And it's probably the reason why we're so excited about this site and what drew us to Auburn is there's a true demand for that housing and a shortage of it today.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and we will continue on with our strong agenda. Appreciate it's a very good-looking project with a lot of challenges.
We're excited.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
The good thing you're both young.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's not good. Isn't that kind of age discrimination?
No,
Age
I'm sorry.
insensitive? I mean, I'm really flexible. I got great ideas.
Okay, we're going to go to 3B as in boy.
I think
Draft ordinance for right-of-way vacation of some property.
Exactly.
Good evening, Mayor Backus, council members. I'm Amber Price, right-of-way specialist with the Public Works Department. Draft ordinance number 6714 is for right-of-way vacation V2-18 for vacation of approximately 3,600 square feet. The right-of-way, it's located north of 10th Street Northeast and east of Auburn Way North along the northern boundary of the Pinehurst Manor Apartments, located at 733 10th Street Northeast. It's shown in the red box on the map on the screen and also page 26 of 58 of your agenda packet. The right-of-way is bordered by Pinehurst Manor Apartments on the south side. They're the applicant who's proposing to incorporate this right-of-way into the use of their property. And it's bordered on the west and north by property owned by AutoZone and on the north and east by single-family residences. Right-of-way was originally quitclaim deeded to the city for street purposes in 1966 at no cost to the city, and the city's never opened this right-of-way or maintained it for public use or street access. The application has been reviewed by city staff and utility purveyors that might have an interest in the right-of-way, and we've determined that it's no longer necessary to meet the needs of the city, and it doesn't appear that there are any utilities located in this right-of-way either. The public hearing for the proposed vacation is scheduled for May 20th, and it was set last week by Resolution 5417 on April 15th. Public benefit, if this vacation were to move forward, would be an increased property tax revenue, as the vacated right-of-way would attach to private property, and it would essentially decrease maintenance obligation and liability of the city for the right-of-way. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from council? Hearing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to item C for Charlie, 3C. 2020-2025 TIP. Transportation Improvement Program.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. For the record, this is James Webb, Senior Traffic Engineer with the Public Works Department. It's tip time again.
He loves us.
So this is the kickoff of an annual approval process for the required annual update to the TIP, which I have a copy of the current version with me. You will have copies of this also. City is required to update the TIP on an annual basis per RCW. It's due to be adopted by council prior to the end of June. So we're towards the end of April, so we're starting the process a little earlier this year. The TIP is our short-term transportation planning document, which we use to identify transportation needs and potential funding opportunities to help fill those needs. The TIP covers a 6-year period. Current one is 2019 through 2024. Obviously, the update will cover 2020 through 2025. The first 3 years of the TIP are required to be financially constrained, so we can only identify and program money that we know is available, be it city funds or external revenue sources, grants, those kind of things. The second 3 years, so years 4, 5, and 6 in the TIP, there's a little bit more flexibility. There's not that requirement that there's a financial constraint on those years, so we can include projects which aren't necessarily completely funded. So, I mean, that's kind of an overview of the process and why we're doing this. We have completed a review of the projects in the current TIP and identified some proposed changes. There are a total of 5 projects in the existing TIP which are proposed to be removed, either because they are going to be completed, construction will be complete, or whatever the phase of the project in the TIP will be complete by the end of this calendar year, which is always a good thing. It shows we're making progress. A number of the other projects are just being rolled into or consolidated with other projects which would remain on the TIP. It's kind of more of a housekeeping item, try and simplify things and reduce the number of projects that we have in the document. And just because it makes sense to look at things on a more holistic, use a more holistic approach on some of these projects. So we've consolidated them into more of, say, a corridor study instead of looking at little individual pieces to make sure that whatever we come up with from a project standpoint is more coherent. So that includes there was a standalone study project to look at the A Street Southeast Lakeland Hills Way signal at the bottom of Lakeland Hills. We're going to take the funding and the scope from that individual project and include it into the A Street Corridor project, which was already in the TIP and was going to look at the whole corridor from downtown to 41st. We're just going to extend that a little bit further and roll that intersection into it as well. And then right now we've identified one new it's kind of a new project to add to the TIP. We have the Lee Hill Road Corridor project in the TIP, and we have that split into 3 phases. Just because of the scale of those projects, we need to break them down into kind of more manageable, more bite-sized pieces. Segment 1, which is from Harvey Road across 8th through the R Street intersection and to 105th at the bottom of Lee Hill. That's kind of our phase 1. We actually want to split that into a phase 1A and a phase 1B, where phase 1A would be something that we can accomplish a little bit sooner. There's more certainty around the scope while we're working on the corridor study for the subsequent phases. And that would be to create a new east-west connection between Garden Avenue and 104th, and then closing off the existing connection at the south end where Garden Avenue connects to 8th Street Northeast. And then those are the changes we have identified to date. We're continuing to work through this document, make changes to the timing of projects, some funding changes to the projects based on what we think are realistic grant expectations, and then to get feedback from City Council and from also the Transportation Advisory Board, who we've already kind of done this initial conversation with back at the meeting in March. And then we have this study session. We have a second study session scheduled for May, where you'll have the opportunity to give us feedback on the entire document. And then we'll be working through the public hearing process and the adoption process as well. So that was all I have.
Is there going to be a roundabout? They talked about a roundabout years ago on 104th
104th.
across Porter Bridge.
Oh, thanks. So we're working on the corridor study right now with an external consultant. That's one of the intersections that's included in that study. A roundabout's certainly a possibility there. But until we get a little bit further through the process, we don't know for certain what that's going to look like.
Thank you. Anything else, gentlemen and ladies? All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Now we're going to go to 3D as in dog, tenant protection laws and programs. And I understand that Mr. Tate might combine a little D and a little E together.
Well, if council is comfortable with talking about both tenant protection laws and multifamily property programs sort of in one conversation, I think that helps because there's some interface there.
Any problems with that, council? Okay, go for it.
Thank you. So starting on page 31 of your packet is a memo that outlines tenant and landlord protections in Washington State and the city of Auburn. It also includes a section about what other cities are doing. So just starting on page 31, one of the kind of overarching rules in Washington State is the Landlord-Tenant Act. And there's also a Manufactured Mobile Home Landlord-Tenant Act, which is a different chapter of the RCW, reads very similarly, but because of the structure of a mobile home park or a manufactured home park, it is more targeted towards those types of setups. Important to know that while those rules are very critical to have in place, in 1985 the state Supreme Court issued a ruling that said that really those are a civil set of rules. Cities in the state of Washington do not enforce landlord-tenant laws. We use them a lot. We open up these sections of the RCW a lot when it comes to code enforcement issues, when we're talking to a landlord or a tenant, just to be, making sure that we're educating folks when a complaint is submitted, but we don't have any enforcement authority in those areas. So it's probably easier to focus more on what the city of Auburn actually does. Rules that we have in place or programs that we have in place include our rental housing business license regulations, so Chapter 5.22 of the Auburn City Code. And that was adopted a number of years ago by City Council, and it's the set of rules that requires a owner of a property that will be rented out to obtain a license from the city. And in many ways, it functions like a registration to begin with. When you submit that application, we review it, ensure that it meets some basic life safety requirements, and then we issue it, and now you're registered within the city's program. This is a really important tool. While it sounds like just a licensing program where we issue a certificate or a license back to a landlord, if there are landlord-tenant issues that come up later on, it gives us enforcement authority. So we have the ability to respond to nuisances or living conditions, complaints about living conditions, things of that nature. You typically assume that the tenant is submitting that kind of complaint, but we do get complaints from landlords as well. And it does break out into different responsibilities that tenants have and different responsibilities that landlords have. And that's part of our job out in the field, is to educate both parties as to what each needs to be doing to make sure that they're complying with local city rules. City Council's also adopted the International Property Maintenance Code. The IPMC is not a section of the international codes that the city is required to adopt. The city does adopt and has adopted it for the last 15 years or so. And that's a really important chapter of the international building codes, because it establishes a lot of the living conditions and the property conditions that should exist on a piece of property. So again, if there's an issue that arises, we have the ability to, through education and enforcement potentially, ensure that landlords and tenants are doing what they need to do property in a healthy, clean living condition. City Council's also adopted the public nuisance regulations. So those are routinely enforced in landlord-tenant scenarios to make sure that, again, everybody's abiding by basic health safety requirements. And then we have mobile home closure regulations, which we're required to have under state law, and obviously pertain to mobile manufactured homes. But many landlord-tenant scenarios exist within mobile home and manufactured home parks, so those will apply too. Some things that other cities are doing, mandatory proactive inspection programs, and we're going to talk about what the city of Auburn does and what the city of Auburn could do and what other cities do when it comes to mandatory inspections. So this is requiring that landlords have their property inspected on a routine basis by either a private inspector or a city inspector. So I'm going to dive more into that in a few seconds. Some cities have adopted longer notification periods for rental increases. The notification increase under Washington state law is that a 30-day notice is required for a rental increase. And what some cities have done is they've said that that needs to be a 60-day requirement if the rent increase is greater than 10% of the current rent. So that's the way you see a lot of other city ordinances structured. Adopting just cause eviction regulations. This is a tool that some cities utilize where a landlord is required to have a reason for evicting someone. And some cities have adopted regulations that basically say that in very simple terms. And then you have a municipality like Seattle that has actually codified the 18 reasons why a landlord can evict a tenant from a property. In fact, in this packet, I've included as Exhibit A what those 18 reasons are that the city of Seattle adopted a just cause eviction ordinance. Some cities have developed a tenant relocation assistance program, and that really applies if the city determines that a multifamily or a rental property is substandard and needs to be condemned, or a building needs to be demolished, that a landlord is required to participate in relocating those tenants. Additionally, and this is attached as Exhibit B, there is the National Center for Healthy Housing has published healthy housing standards, and some municipalities have adopted those healthy housing standards. It's a pretty dense set of standards, so as Exhibit B, I included the table of contents only, just to provide a sense of sort of the material that is contained within that document. It's really greater specificity than the IPMC. So if the International Property Maintenance Code might speak to what living conditions should be inside of a home, then healthy housing standards go much deeper on what those living conditions should be. One thing that's an advantage, because I think that sometimes adopting rules like that might seem like it's a greater burden on the landlord only, is that those national standards are really good about delineating what is the responsibility of the tenant and what is the responsibility of the landlord. In the code enforcement world, we face that scenario a lot. And it comes up, one of the examples I included in the packet is where there's a mold or a mildew complaint. Mold and mildew could be due to a landlord issue. It could be due to a tenant issue. So whenever we go out and investigate something like that, we have to look at what's happening in that unit to figure out who's responsible for fixing the moisture issue. So if we walk in there and we determine that none of the fans are working in the kitchen and the bathrooms, if they don't have screens for windows that open, you know, there's things that we're looking at. If there's moisture in the windows, those might become landlord issues that need to be resolved. Other times you see stuff, people's belongings, that accumulates and might be blocking a heat register under a window on an outside exterior wall. And sometimes moisture issues arise because of things like that. So we inform the tenant of changes they need to make. So moving into the inspection program, and that really starts on page 41. I first outlined what the multifamily profile looks like in Auburn. We have about 460 multifamily properties in the city. And I've outlined those in duplex, triplex, fourplex apartments, and communal residences. Those 460 multifamily properties account for about 12,000 dwelling units in the city. And that's about 28% of the number of total dwelling units in the city of Auburn. I've also mentioned that we have in our system 552 business licenses for rental homes. These are not multifamily homes, they're single-family residences that are being rented out. And I included that because we regulate those, and we want to ensure that there's healthy living conditions in those units as well. So for our multifamily program in Auburn, again, we have the rental housing license program. It was adopted by council in 2002, and it obviously includes an annual license. It costs $53 for 1 to 4 units, $106 for 5 to 25 units, and $212 for more than 25 units. That section of code it lays out very nicely requirements for how a multifamily property owner or rental property owner is required to engage with the city. And a lot of that has an emphasis on how they're required to engage with the police department for the city. And much of that is focused on making sure that properties are safe and neighborhoods are safe. Most property managers and landlords in the city do a really good job of trying to create healthy, livable communities. Occasionally we come across a property manager or a landlord that needs a little bit of nudge, a little bit of help in trying to get them to do a few extra things on the property to make it a more livable and healthy and safe community. So a lot of those strategies focus on crime reduction and how to screen tenants in a really positive way. This section of code also speaks to precluding discriminatory practices when screening potential tenants. So recall that council adopted a source of income discrimination rule a year or two ago. That's the section we put it in because there are other discriminatory practices that are addressed in that section of code as well. I included in here that Auburn Police Department CRT, or the Community Response Team, is also an important piece of our multifamily program. And I mention that because they work really closely with property managers and multifamily property owners, trying to develop relationships with those folks. Because while a 911 call might inform everybody about incidents that are happening, lots of times at multifamily properties, issues may be more persistent. So you want to have more than 911 interactions. You want to have ongoing communication and a relationship with folks. Building on top of these requirements, we've also established what we call the SAFER program. It's Safe Auburn for Every Resident. This is more of a voluntary piece. Part of it's mandatory, part of it's voluntary, but we require that every multifamily property owner or manager in this city go through go through crime prevention training. And this is a requirement of their license, their annual license. So that training occurs 3 or 4 times a year. It's a full day, it's an 8-hour day. It's led primarily by Auburn Police Department with some support from code enforcement as well as Valley Regional Fire Authority. And we have, of those 460 multifamily properties referenced earlier, 425 are through the program. So we have a pretty small number out there that we're still trying to ensure that they know that it's mandatory and their licenses have been conditioned to say that they need to complete that training in 2019 in order to obtain their license looking forward. The safer part of it, though, after you get through the crime prevention training, is that if you want to invite us out to your property to do an inspection, a voluntary inspection, we will come out and we will do that inspection. And we've done a whole bunch of them. And why would you do that? Why would you invite us out to do an inspection? A lot of multifamily property managers and owners want their community to be known as a safe community. It's a marketing piece for them as much as it is, you know, a governmental concept of saying we want you to, you know, we want to inspect your property, we want to make sure it's safe. But what we do is when they pass the inspection, we look at fire issues, we look at building issues. When they pass the inspection, they get a certificate, and then they get a whole bunch of other marketing materials. And then they're able to just label their community as a safer community. And it's been, I think, well received by the property managers that have done it. Clearly, there's going to be some that are skeptical about what we might say or do out on site, but it's a voluntary program. Much of what we're inspecting against from a code perspective is International Property Maintenance Code, so it goes back to that. So we don't randomly come up with what we think are important pieces or features to be looking at. They're guided by the rules. The last couple pages of this packet talk about what other cities do and what the state law says. So I've highlighted Tukwila, Kent, Lakewood, and Bellingham, and there are other cities, but highlighted them as examples of cities that have adopted mandatory inspection programs. And Tukwila was one of the earlier cities to do that. And so their program's a little different than some of the other cities. But that's because they're really vested to their program, which was adopted before state law went into effect that allows cities to establish such programs. So in Tukwila, they require a multifamily inspection every 4 years. For properties that are a fourplex or less, they may hire a private inspector to conduct that inspection and submit the report to the city. For larger properties, for the smaller properties, they may hire or utilize a city inspector. For larger properties, they have to hire a private inspector. And the city requires that that you pass that inspection in order to hold a license in their city. Kent just started their program, and that came as a result of some reaction in their community back in 2015 and 16, where they had a really big showing at a city council meeting demanding that apartments and multifamily properties be held to a higher standard in Kent than they were being held to. So they adopted code amendments last year, and they modeled their program after Lakewood and Bellingham, which I'll talk about in a second. They require that inspections be conducted by third-party inspectors, and it be once every 3 years. Lakewood, similar kind of time frames. Their inspection requirement is once every 5 years. They have actually hired 2 full-time staff to do their multifamily inspections, but property owners have the option of hiring a third-party inspector as well. And they also require that single-family homes be inspected as well. And they do a sort of kind of a lottery system in order to determine who's going to be inspected each year. It's a random drawing, and then if you as a landlord receive the notice that you got called this year, you have 9 months to get the inspection completed and submitted to the city. Bellingham, their program applies to single family and multifamily. It's a once every 3-year inspection requirement. You can use a city inspector or a pre-qualified private inspector from an approved list that the city provides to property owners. The last page in at least the agenda, Bill, on page 45, speaks to the state law that's in effect. And, in 2010, the state legislature adopted law that allows local municipalities to establish a program like this. And I've highlighted several bullet points here that are taken from the law, but the full extent of the law is in your packet as well. Just hitting on those in sort of closing remarks. Cities are allowed to establish a requirement that landlords must provide a certificate of inspection as a business license condition. City may require inspections no more frequently than once every 3 years. If the program is adopted, landlords are required to provide notification to their tenants that inspections of individual units may be required, so going inside people's homes. For rental properties that have 20 or fewer units, the municipality is precluded from requiring more than 4 individual units to be inspected. And if the property is more than 21 units, can't exceed 20% of the number of units and can't be more than 50 of those units within that multifamily property. Municipality may demand a greater number of individual units to be inspected if they failed the initial inspection. And the program must allow for a property owner to have the option to hire a private inspector to conduct the inspection. So that adoption of that state law did create some structure around which cities must establish such a program. I haven't come forward on either the tenant protection side or the multifamily inspection side with any recommendations. Recall that it's probably November of 2018 where council requested information in these 2 subject areas. Initially it was scheduled for February, but snowstorm got moved. So I know that that's a lot of time that's gone by, but I wanted to just mention we're not coming with any recommendations, just coming with information, and happy to answer questions or come back to council and talk more about any of these concerns.
Excuse me. Jeff, have we had, well, let me start out this way. It appears to me that we have improved a lot of tenant housing by just looking around, code enforcement, et cetera. I know myself, down by the post office, there were a couple apartments there where they were really a mess. Quality of life was very poor in there. Now the owners have fixed them up. It appears so. The tenants have to be happy campers. But do we have any other sore spots in the city, like that area was at one time?
Yeah, so back in 2010 and 11, we hit a property that had a lot of overcrowding issues, a lot of rodent and pest control issues, and it was really rundown housing. And didn't take long, I think, for the word to get out in that community that this city was not willing to tolerate that. So I think that I mean, in the end, that action had a ripple effect, I think. And it doesn't mean that we still don't have some problem properties. We do. And there's probably 10 or 12 properties of those 460 that we visit more frequently than some of the other properties. And, that's due to a variety of reasons. Sometimes housing stock gets a little bit old and it needs some investment. And some of it is just due to the period of time when it was constructed and you have moisture issues. And they're hard to overcome those. But we are more proactive than we used to be. We used to be very reactive and wait for complaints to come in. I think that we've also, I want to say, between code enforcement and police, have teamed up just on sharing information and making sure that more property owners and property managers are aware that we're here as a resource. But we're also here to, hold everybody to a certain standard.
So there have been a lot of improvements in the last 10 years. Bob, did you have a?
Yeah, I had a question for Jeff. Jeff, does the SAFER program, is that available, or is it, let me put it another way. Are manufactured or mobile home park managers and owners, are they part of that SAFER program as far as applicability is concerned?
So we have not deployed SAFER to manufactured home or multifamily community or mobile home communities. With that said, the preceding parts of being required to hold a license, being engaged with the management companies that oversee those properties, and requiring training, those pieces have followed because there's been interest. At the start, we thought we're going to just approach multifamily property owners, but we've had an interesting response from single-family rental property owners and from mobile home and manufactured home communities, saying there's a lot that we could learn from coming to this training and that we can bring back to our own communities. So we haven't deployed that in a requirement kind of.
That's not part of the mandatory?
It's not mandatory, but we have a small enough number of mobile home, manufactured home communities in the city that the word's gotten out to them, and most of them have gone through the program anyway.
Now, the reason I ask is because our park, Claude and I live, we have new managers that have just come in from Vermont. And even though that the owners of the park are based out of California, it would be interesting, and I've attended some of the SAFER programs when I was deputy mayor before, and I find it very valuable information for managers of multifamily dwellings and things like that. So I'd like to impart that information to them in hopes that maybe that would be a good learning experience for them. Now, the inspection part would be different, of course.
Yeah, and that's purely voluntary, but either through me or through CRT or through code enforcement, we'd be happy to establish a relationship to get them
We
involved.
happen to have a schedule for when, I know
It's on
that
the
they're 4
city's-
times a year.
Yeah, it's on the city's webpage. It's on the police department's webpage.
Okay.
So it's the crime prevention. Crime-free prevention training program.
Okay, thank you.
Claude?
Jeff, thanks for bringing this forward. I know it took a while to get here, but I'm glad we're talking about this now, and examples are really good. I like the periodic inspection process. I think it's valuable not only for landlords, I think it's valuable for tenants as well, because we have problematic tenants and just happen to flag some things in their units that can cause them problems. It's always a good thing to make them aware as well as make the landlord aware of that. So I think it's something we may want to talk about more, and whether there's a possibility of agreeing that it's something that we may want to do in the city as well. Not specifically related, but it was mentioned in the Bellingham bullet points. They talk about their source of income discrimination. We passed legislation related to source of income discrimination, and a year later, the state followed suit. We now have a state law. However, we're seeing that there's still some landlords who do not comply with the source of income discrimination on the state level. They basically, like if they're using Section 8, they still say no Section 8. The problem is that there's no enforcement provision in the state law. So it's nothing that can be really dealt with except for its legislation in the state. With our legislation, do we have any provision, any type of circumstance where we can enforce our source of income discrimination legislation?
Absolutely. Our enforcement language is robust. There's a different problem. It's learning about it. So I think oftentimes what ends up happening is that if that practice is in place, how will the city find out? That's the harder piece to this, because if we know it and we can document it, we have many tools at our disposal, from civil and criminal enforcement actions that we can put into effect. But as I've thought about it in my own mind, if I'm the one who's going to seek housing and I apply for submit my application and it's denied, where does that person? How does that person even know that we are here to help? How does that person know? Perhaps that person moves on to a complex in Kent, Federal Way, or somewhere else, and they never have an interaction in Auburn again. So it's harder to me to figure out how we root that out a little bit. And some of it is through education to the program or the property managers, and making sure that they know, because most folks want to abide by the law, not everybody. So getting the word out to those folks is important, but until you have really the ability to require that we review their lease agreements ahead of time, it's really hard. It's a tough one, but we have adequate enforcement if we know about it.
Yolanda.
Jeff, it says here that before they get their license, that they have to go through this training.
For City of Auburn, or for one of the other cities?
To get the SAFE program.
So the way you can apply for your license, we condition the license the first year to say you have to go through the program, because the program is not, if you have to wait 3 months to get enrolled into a class, we don't think you should have to wait 3 months to get your license. So it's a condition upon that initial license. And when we go to renew a license the next year, we double check to make sure they went through it before we'll renew a license.
So you also say here that at the end they get a certificate, they get a window. Okay, I see it now. Because I was going to suggest, like the blue ribbon, when we were doing the healthiest food, we were going to advertise the logo and also give them a stamp to put at their window.
Yeah.
So do they get that? So they'll say that this apartment building.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as many as they want.
Okay,
Put
just
one in
wanted
every
to make
window
sure.
if they wanted to.
And well, I already know. Thank you.
So I looked in our sections here that we've just been talking about, you've been talking about. What is our inspection time frame?
For the SAFER program, to go out and inspect a multifamily?
I didn't see it in here.
Yeah, I didn't say anything in there.
Didn't
It's a
say.
good question. Are you talking about how often you would need an?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We don't have any rule regarding that, because we don't have mandatory inspections. We have decided from a program point of view, if you want to stay in the SAFER program, that we're conducting an inspection every 5th year.
And what?
Every 5th year to remain in the program. but we don't require that. If you don't arrange for that inspection, you'll be removed from the list, but you still get your license because we don't have mandatory inspections in Auburn.
Well, like Kent and Tukwila, they've got a time frame.
But theirs are mandatory.
Yeah.
Ours are voluntary.
Yeah, so why don't we make ours mandatory?
Well, I think that's one of the questions, I mean, of
Okay.
providing information to council is,
So maybe we could put that on our council matrix and bring it up as a discussion topic itself.
yeah, I think that, I think there's a lot to talk about with respect to just
Yeah,
that
right.
program itself. I mean,
Well, like you said earlier, you know, because of the winter months and all this other stuff, things have been pushed back and
Yeah.
priorities have been brought forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, any further questions of Mr. Tate? Margaret?
Well, I think that it might be time for us. You said that you didn't bring any recommendations. We've talked to you, or Bill's brought it up, that maybe we need to look at that particular issue. So maybe we need to just see if we've got a quorum to maybe have added at a future time after Nancy works with you for your staff to come up with some recommendations, and maybe also include in the recommendations a discussion regarding inspections. And do we have a quorum so that could be added to the matrix?
Another thought would be to maybe set up an ad hoc.
I could offer one suggestion too, just to continue the conversation, is maybe to bring forward anything that code enforcement, and maybe there's a question to police, is do we find that there are deficiencies in enforcing healthy and safe housing in our community? I don't know, to be frank with you, I don't know if we have deficiencies or not. I mean, I can think of an incident here and an incident there where we've been challenged, but maybe it's a good thing to come back to full council and just, and provide experience from our team to say, are we running into problems out there that is leading to a decline in our housing stock?
That we need policy on.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a good idea, and the reason why is because I have heard that in some apartment complex, there are people that are having two family members living in one two-bedroom apartment, and they each have children. And how are you going to know unless there was a regular check? And if they're abiding by their contract? You know, because when you fill out an application, you have to say how many people is living in that apartment, and then if they have another family member move in, they don't update their contract. So we won't know unless we went and checked. You know, we would come across these kind of things. But I have heard this.
Yeah, that's not typically something that the city of Auburn needs to determine. That would be
No, but we
with
would
the landlord and the tenant or tenants. It wouldn't be up to us to say you've got one more than you have in your rental contract.
That isn't what I'm saying. I'm saying that when they go to check, when they go to do a regular home inspection, they would find out that there's more people living in that apartment than they originally said that was going to be living in that apartment. Because I have heard that there are people living, two family members with children in a two-bedroom apartment around here.
But that isn't necessarily for the city of Auburn to police how many people are living in an apartment.
Wouldn't that fall under a safety issue?
We have the ability to enforce International Property Maintenance Code, which, in a roundabout way, starts to get to overcrowding. And that becomes the question. So there's some harder facts to prove about, because we don't get to ask them
Right, I
for
know
their lease agreement. But there are rules that say that, 120 square feet, 2 people, or whatever the number is, some number that 2 people can live in that square footage. But it doesn't mean when we're inspecting that we would see people there. And but that's another piece that is easy to inform back. Or what are some of the standards?
Clyde.
So, in response to you, Deputy Mayor, I do believe, and I did state that, yes, I think we should review and have a discussion related to a mandatory inspection process at a periodic time, 4 years, 5 years, the time frame may be. But I'd also be curious to look at the number of properties that have changed hands over the years, because I believe that if we have an inspection program, and you say it's every 5 years, but we have a property that's flipped in 3 years, we need to have provisions that show we do inspect that property upon change of ownership as well. Else it may not have the cycle in it to handle it. I think a lot of our properties, you mentioned it, look really good on the exterior, but that doesn't tell the whole story of where we're at with property management overall, or with conditions overall. So I think it's something we need to do as an entire council rather than ad hoc, and have more presentation and kind of discuss the merits, pros and cons of doing a mandatory inspection program.
So are you recommending we establish an ad hoc?
No, I'm saying instead of an ad hoc, we do it as a full
instead.
council in the study session, and then discuss the pros and cons and the merits of the mandatory inspection program with the more data information that Jeff and his staff will provide.
It's a matrix item.
I feel comfortable with what Claude is proposing, and I think that we need to stick to, we tried to do this on the Seattle King County Board of Health, and we need to stick to the health issues. That's a good place to start. That'll help us gather some information on some of these other issues. But, when it comes to mold and holes in floors and things that are very physical and very visible, they're easier to deal with them from an objective point of view. And then I still want to go back to, I want to see what your team recommends that we should be looking at in other areas too.
Okay. Did we miss anybody?
Well, do we have enough people that think this should be added to the matrix
Yes.
without
Okay.
voting?
We'll, when we get to the matrix, we'll throw something else.
And then I would just ask that when you get to the matrix, it gets added as an item, but a TBD on date, so we can.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Wait till after the next
No worries.
snowstorm.
Jeff, no worries. Okay. So, we will go to finance. Finance,
Oh,
technology, economic development.
well, no, I don't think we have any issues tonight, and so I'd like to see us move on.
All right. Other discussion items. New business. Yeah.
So I noticed under the municipal services, we have animal control. And animal control is something that the city has taken on authority, and I don't remember the exact date. Is that correct?
We have had animal control, oh, you're talking about from King County.
Right.
Yes, that's been in place for several years.
Several years. I mean, have we reviewed that program, how it's working?
We have, it's been a while since we've done that, but it has been reviewed. But, always.
I don't know if it's an issue or a problem, or I was just curious about it. And if fellow council members thought we ought to take a look at the animal control work that our city's doing, I mean, I'm curious. Pets are pretty important for some folks.
For all of us, yeah.
Oh, yes.
So,
when we come to the matrix, why don't we brainstorm?
Well, I thought that's what we were
I
talking.
thought we were doing that.
No,
No,
we're
we're on new business.
I said new
Okay.
business, but
I should stay on the agenda then.
that's all right. Okay, we will now go to the matrix, you guys.
All right.
All right, now Larry,
Deputy Mayor, yes, that's what I was,
you want to add an item? to
yeah. A review of our animal control work as a city.
Municipal services, animal.
We don't have a dearth of future projects here.
Consensus?
And what specifically do you want to know about animal control?
You know, maybe study the program, what, how it's going.
You just want an update, maybe?
An update, right, right.
Okay. I'm sure they have that right in their cuff, too.
Consensus? Do you have a consensus?
I think we did. Consensus? Yeah. Yeah, we did. Okay, yes,
You know,
Yolanda?
I saw in the paper where Nexus and the YMCA were joining forces on building a facility for the homeless. We haven't heard from them for quite a while, so I was wondering if we could suggest them coming and talking to us and telling us more about what they're planning on doing.
Hello, council?
No?
Would you for that? Adding it to the,
That might be a while off. They're still trying to organize themselves.
probably right.
I don't know that the timing is right now, because they're still working internally on some of those
Okay.
items.
I wasn't
And right now,
aware.
there is no city funding involved in that project.
Right, yeah, I knew that.
Yeah, everybody's quit.
Isn't Valley Cities working on something like that also for their property?
I think you're talking about the 1.5 million that was secured out of the capital budget in Olympia 2 years ago. And that's moving forward. They plan on having those 12 blockable units in place in just a couple of months, isn't it now, Jeff?
They're very close to getting all their approvals.
okay, so we've got animal control review update to be added. Anything else, gentlemen and ladies?
Putting
Inspection
the
policy.
inspection protocol for, as Jeff just presented on here as well. So the periodic inspections of rental properties. that we just talked about, yep. It's rental property inspections. Red.
Okay, does everybody agree that that should come on the matrix? Okay. Mary, you mentioned something else. What was
Well,
it?
I'm just wondering if that really is under, yeah, I guess it's under community development.
Community development, I don't know.
Yeah, community development.
Or it should be under community
That'd be
development.
That's, I was just wondering which one. It's kind of,
Housing quality.
it's gonna be Jeff either way.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah, probably put that under community development.
We'll add that.
Yeah.
It might make a difference as how long it takes to do the work, to bring it back.
So we'll hold off on that one, Texas, for a while. Put our ears to the grind and see what's going on.
The School of Auburn is still, the coalition would still like to come and, but I didn't get a chance to print out because I just got it. I went to their meeting last week on Thursday and they sent me the link to the survey they did. And that survey does not come from the the health department. It comes from where we get our fundings. We've got a grant, and that is one of the requirements that we have to do every year to be able to get the money to do advertising and all kinds of other stuff through this program. So they're still wanting to come and share some things, and they're wanting us to see if we would enforce the 24 feet, that's in law already, and do something for the School of Auburn because all the kids are still smoking and stuff. So I told them to put something together to see what it looks like, and because we have to, our attorney told me that we would have to talk to Chief Pearson on something like this.
Wouldn't the enforcement of smoking on school property be with the SRO?
That's correct, yes.
And the school administrators?
Yeah, that wouldn't be for us necessarily to determine, but that's the school resource officer.
Okay. Well, she's on this committee, and we have a police officer on this committee, so.
I can't imagine that the school district administrators want a bunch of police standing around enforcing smoking or non-smoking.
I don't believe that that's what they want to do. What they were talking about is putting signs up to, say we are enforcing if you are caught or whatever. It's not having all these police officers, in the area. It's just our city just taking an initiative on, So they're going to put something together. Rhonda, and Ashley are going to get together and sit down and talk to also Chief Pearson to see the wording, and then bring it to us and to the attorney to see if it's something that we can do. Okay, so I'll just put that. I just wanted to let you know where we were at, because Largo, Councilmember Wells wanted to have a copy of that survey that we did that started this whole step. So that's where we're at right now.
Let's chat about it.
Yeah.
So the item, the housing inspection discussion, that would be a mandatory, correct? Yeah.
We're going to decide.
Well, with further discussion.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, ladies and gentlemen?
Just on the Auburn Avenue Theater, it's still TBD on here?
Oh,
It's still
okay.
TBD.
Same? All right.
The appraisal should be in around the end of the month.
And then funding options, share Wales. It's ongoing?
Yep.
Okay. Emergency management training, Chair Brown,
Yeah, I think that's
5/28 is still good?
scheduled for 28th of May.
Okay. What about the animal control review? Or I put down animal control AVHS update.
You want,
TBD.
you want AVHS in there too? That's different than what you asked for.
I don't know if it was.
It is. He asked for animal control.
Well,
Which is our police officers.
We have 2 animal control officers,
yeah.
but that's not AVHS. They don't oversee animal control.
So Larry,
Yes.
what do you want? What were you recommending?
What I was asking for was the animal control, just a
well-
report on.
That would just be the police department then, right?
Correct. That would be a report from animal control, perhaps on number of calls,
Yeah.
process,
Dangerous
those
dogs.
types of things.
Yeah, dangerous animals.
Okay, so I'm gonna put animal control, APD, just to identify it. Okay, Larry?
Sounds great.
All right. All right, animal control. And that is under municipal services. that will be Public Works and Community
No,
Development.
community wellness.
Community Development.
Community wellness.
Oh, wellness?
It's because it's housing quality.
It's the green one.
Green room.
Oh, okay. Okay, so, is that it, everybody? We're adjourned. All right.